All right, so we are at time, and I'm going to go ahead and let you guys know what you're in for. Today, we're learning about vintage aerial, and there is a panel of speakers today. We're going to be hearing from Alexis Petrie. Alexis is the customer relations and engagement manager. She has a background in history, spends time with her fiance, and is excited to see what new adventures await at Vintage Aerial. Nathan Lewis. Nathan is the Director of Archive Development, responsible for making much of Vintage Aerial's content available online. He has a background in audio and electrical engineering and is a professional mixologist. Lance Roper. Lance is the Director of Customer Experience at Vintage Aerial. He enjoys spending time with his wife and 3 cats, having a good Manhattan with the team and coffee roasting. And Fritz Byers, he is Vintage Aerial's president and CEO. So if you would like to share your screen.
Allison, thank you so much. I'm Fritz Byers, and I'm part of the team here that operates Vintage Aerial. And I want to thank Allison and everybody at the Allen County Public Library and those associated with the Genealogy Center for the opportunity to spend this time this afternoon with you. We're certainly aware of the breadth and depth of what Allen County does for its visitors and users and customers, and its prominence in the genealogy area. We admire everything that you do, and we've thought since we came across the Genealogy Center that it was a natural relationship, because the values that drive everything that Allison and the team do there are very similar to the values that brought all of us together to create Vintage Aerials. So Allison, to you and all of your team, many thanks for the welcome and the opportunity to spend this time with you. As Allison said, there are 4 of us who will be talking with you today. I'm going to just briefly give you an overview of what Vintage Aerial is and how we came into existence, why we do what we do, and what our hopes for the future are. Then you'll hear from Lance, who will talk to you a little bit about the history of our photographs and the collection, and how the photographs were originally taken. Then you'll hear from Nathan, who will talk about how we have taken old photographs from their analog basis in film and how we have digitized them in this very fancy system that we've developed to make all of them available online for inspection and admiration and comment, and if you'd like, purchase. And then we'll hear from Alexis, who will be talking about the process for going on our website and searching for photographs for whatever reason, just to look at them if they're personally meaningful to you, how you can comment on them. Then you'll hear again from Lance about how, if you'd like to, you can become part of our community and be part of this far-flung network of volunteers that we have who are helping us really build an alternative story about the history of rural America. So we're excited to share all this information with you and look forward to that. And then I hope we can have a really interesting question and answer session afterwards. So I have a bit of a background in American history. I'm interested in rural American history and oral history, and so it's been a particular privilege of mine to be associated with Vintage Aerial. We're a small company based in Toledo, Ohio. There are just 7 of us who work actively on the company. We're efficient, we overlap in what we do, and we're all driven by a shared passion, a deep belief in the value of our historical archive, a deep belief that sharing history is a great way to bring communities and people together, and that the more information you can have about your own lives and the more understanding you have about the experiences, history, and the lives of others, the better off we'll all be. So those are values that we hold deep. We are a privately held company, but all of the owners are still associated with the company. It's a small company in terms of the number of people, but we think it's a nationally, if not internationally, significant company in terms of why we exist and what we have. Simply stated, we exist to share the history of rural America as reflected in our photo archive. And we're happy to say that we believe we have the largest single subject archive of photographs anywhere in the world. We've said that many, many times over the 12 or so years of our existence, and nobody has ever disputed it. And in our own research, we haven't found anything to the contrary. Believe it or not, we have 22 million photographs of rural America homestead, primarily homesteads and farmsteads, spread across North America with a heavy concentration in the eastern half of the United States, although we have photographs in 42 of the 50 American states. There are many, many states, including Indiana, in which we have essentially comprehensive coverage, meaning we have photographs of almost all rural properties in the state. And we find this very, very exciting. So before we get into the details of this and hear about the history from Lance, I just want to sort of give you an overview of how this company came to exist and what our purpose for carrying this legacy forward is. As many of you may know, in the 1950s, a really interesting industry developed in the United States, and there were several very significant or prominent leaders of this industry. The industry was essentially taking speculative photographs, hiring photographers to go up into small planes and take aerial photographs of homesteads, and then developing those photographs, sending salesmen door to door. Many of you may have encountered salesmen of this kind, showing these photographs and asking if you would like a copy of them. This industry was very vibrant from the late 1950s until around the 1990s, when, because of demographic changes having to do with two people working in the same household, the decline in the frequency of farms so that it was much harder to find them, and also the cost of gasoline and transportation. Those in combination, those demographic changes really changed the economic viability of these businesses. So there were really sizable aerial photography collections that were languishing without any real use. And sort of by a coincidence, and we love to talk about this, but I'm going to avoid going into the details now, a group of us organized around these collections with different perspectives. We had people who were in the photography business, we had technology experts, we had people from the family who were familiar with operations, and then we had people who were interested in history. And it was our impulse that online technology and the prevalence of the World Wide Web and the internet created a completely new opportunity to share these photographs, not primarily as a commercial endeavor, but just as a sharing endeavor in our common history. So we formed Vintage Aerial in 2009. We have existed since that time. Our largest single archive came from State Aerial. And since then, we have acquired several other archives. So as I said, we have about 22 million historical photographs, primarily taken in the second half of the 20th century of rural America. And our mission is to make those photographs available for sharing, for connecting people with their legacies and their histories, for sharing stories, because as we all know, the maxim, a photograph is worth 1,000 words, and we found there's nothing more evocative than seeing a photograph and sharing memories about that. So we've worked very hard to put these photographs online, to make them available to anyone who wants to visit our site, and for those who find meaning in the photograph to acquire them. So I'm going to turn over now to Lance and the rest of the team who know much more about the operations than I do. So up next is Lance Nathan. He's the Director of Customer Experience, and he'll tell you more about the history of our photographs. Lance?
Thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Lance, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how all these photographs came into existence. Fritz mentioned earlier about the speculative aerial photography industry And I just wanted to go into a little bit more detail on that. For those of you that haven't heard that term before, speculative aerial photography essentially meant that pilots were hired to take photographs basically without permission. What they would do is they were assigned a particular area, usually it was a county, and they were instructed to take photographs of every farm and house that they could see. Usually they were instructed not to take photos in heavily populated areas. There were altitude restrictions and other things in place that would have prevented that anyways. But at that time, if you can imagine, in the early 1950s, not that many people had been on a plane before. And certainly in rural communities, you could probably imagine that not many people had ever seen a picture of their farm from the sky. And so when a team of door-to-door salespeople would come around with these photographs that were taken, it was a perspective that these people had never had, and it was a pretty popular product. There are other reasons why the product was probably pretty successful, and that may have been as a result of the salesman being really effective. High pressure sales, it wasn't really a thing that people weren't unfamiliar with, and door-to-door sales was certainly a thing that was a little bit more regular than it is now. But they would approach the house, knock on the door with a 4x6 print of the photo that was taken, and that in a sample bag was all that salesperson had. Usually that person was offered a color photo, but it wasn't really a color film photo. That enlargement was colorized with basically tinting oils. And here in Toledo, Ohio, there was a team of people that would take enlargements, and they would colorize them according to the specifications recorded by the salesperson. And they went all over the country selling these colorized aerial photographs from black and white film. So that was sort of the process of how the sales was, how they were occurring at the time. It was all door to door, and essentially hired pilots in planes, not unlike this one that I've just put on the slide, usually just a small, like a Cessna or whatever the planes were at the time. The process was, this pilot would essentially, they would pre-draw their flight plan onto a county map, and they would fly that plan as close as they possibly could. And what they would do is, at each point that they would change out a roll of film, they would make a notation on the map. And from there, that flight path would later be followed by the salespeople, and they would follow those lines in order to go door to door. So, the film from all of these sessions was miraculously saved. It was used for reorders or reprints, and sometime later, salespeople would go out and recanvas that particular area. It was a hugely popular product. There were a lot of companies that were sort of getting into the aerial photography business in the 1950s and early 1960s. But, there were a few that really turned into decent sized companies. And we've been fortunate in being able to identify and acquire some of those collections that make up the majority of what we have and what we've been digitizing. Let's see what's next. I just wanted to also show you kind of an overlay of the land that our collection is covering. Most of this area is in the Midwest, up the East Coast, and we have quite a few photos in Texas and Louisiana also. But as I mentioned previously, the pilots were instructed to take photographs of rural properties and homesteads or farms. And for whatever reason, that was what they decided to sell. They had a sales plan for connecting with those people, and the pictures were beautiful because you had a lot of area between houses, and so we didn't have a lot of crossover, or in other words, there weren't a lot of photos where you could see the neighbor's house, and people didn't tend to like that at the time. So it covers pretty much half of the country, as you can see. And we're really proud of this collection, and we are searching for more collections that we can find, but I'll speak a little bit more about that later. I think at this point, we're ready to turn it over to Nathan Lewis, and he's going to be addressing the big question, which was, we have all this film, now what? What do you do with it?
Right.
So.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Lewis, and the Director of Operations and Archival Development. So what we ended up with for the 22 million images is, I'm going to go to the next slide here. This is a shot from just a small shot of a large library. And you can see shelf after shelf full of these boxes of film that were coded in a way to be able to know which county they're from and what year they're from. And that was done by the original companies. And if it hadn't been done, this process may have been nearly impossible. As Fritz mentioned, there's about 22 million images, which is about 500,000 rolls of 35 millimeter film. And so that's about 4,000 of these boxes that you see on the screen here. So we had the daunting task of having to get these analog 35 millimeter rolls of film into a digital format and then be able to search them once they've been digitized. So over the last 10 years, we have been, there's a shot of inside the box. So each box has about 122 rolls of 35 millimeter film in it. And so over the last 10 years, one of our employees, his name is Charles, he's been using, these are Fuji SP3000 scanners, and he scans a full-time job and has been the whole time scanning away. Each roll takes about 3 minutes to scan. And you can see we've got 4 scanners. So he goes from scanner to scanner and scans them away. And that leaves us with a digitized version of the black and white film. So we've got a high resolution file. So the next step is, well, how do we get that file to someone who wants to find it? And that requires a bit of technology, which we, our engineer who's not here today, Kevin Marsh, built some proprietary software that allows us to take the maps that Lance had mentioned. We scan those maps. And so this is a picture of the county maps, and you can see the red line here is where the pilot was flying. And we'll go into a bit more detail about it here. So the pilot was flying, and as he would finish a roll of film, he would mark number 2. And so what we've done is we've scanned all of these maps and then stretched them over Google Maps so that if you toggled them, these roads match up right with the Google Map roads, which allows us to create an estimated geolocation for each photo. So all the photos on roll 1 there, we know that they're along that line somewhere, and this generally gets you within about a mile of the location. So there's a picture of me doing the tracing. So I use a touch screen pad with a stylus, and I trace over each line, which is creating that geo position for each roll. It's a very time-consuming process between the scanning, the uploading and storing of the film, and then the scanning of the maps, the stretching of the maps, and then the geocoding of the lines on the maps. So it has taken us a long time, but we have finally gotten to the point where we do have 17.7 million photos scanned and online. 15.6 million of those photos are geocoded, which is this process I've been describing here. And about 700,000 of those photos have pinpoint locations, which is from the users that pin, and Alexis is going to talk more about that process as we move forward here. Which pretty much, I guess, leads into Alexis's part, where she's going to show you, once we've gotten these photos online and they've been geocoded within that 1 mile range, they are searchable, but the next step is getting the community's help to get that finite pinpoint location, so that the goal in the end is that every photo is completely pinpoint accurate and hopefully has some sort of story or history attached to it. So I will turn it over to Alexis, and she's going to take you through the search process.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexis Petrie. I am the Customer Relation and Engagement Manager. If you are emailing in or calling in, you are most likely going to hear back from me about 95% of the time right now. So I'm going to show you how to do a classic search on our site. So I'm going to start my address over again, 5487 County Road or State Route 113. And I could put OH 113. There's a few different ways you can type the address to get to the location you want. So here I have 4 photos that have been previously pinned. But I'm seeing that 1994, 95 is not in these photos. And that's the year that I'm looking for. So I'm going to keep scrolling down. And this is all of the film that our search system has found within a 1 mile radius of the location I'm searching for. Quite a bit in Huron County, Ohio. Some counties have a little bit less, some have a little bit more. I'm going to look into the 1995 film. All right. So I know some of these properties are around the photo. Still scrolling, still scrolling. Should be in here somewhere. Oh man, and now that I'm here in front of the camera, I can't find it. All right. And this is also trial by error for many of us here and users at home. So I might just need to go back, click on the next roll of film and keep going. So sorry, I am not a Mac user. Gonna keep scrolling. Well, oh, and here's a pop-up to join our newsletter. All right, and so when you are looking to pin a location, so you have to scroll down and you'll see here off to the side that we have an approximate map. So this shows where that red line was on our flight path earlier that you were shown. So I click in. Okay. So to be able to pin a location, you have to be logged into our site as a user. We're just going to use our login here. So I'm going to scroll down and I can enlarge this map so it's a little bit easier for me to see. And I'm going to scroll in real close. I can get really close and I can start to see all these houses popping up. I can even turn on satellite view. And I'm going to say that this property was right here. And I'm going to right click or double click. And I'm going to save this pin. And now this pin has been placed and anybody who is searching for this address will now see this associated picture for that address. It's a great way to kind of help our fellow users, help us figure out where all of our film is actually located. And we can go back to and if you just want to get back to your search results, we've made it really easy. You can click here at search results and we come right back to the beginning. We have a second way that you can do a search, and that's through our county map system. So we go right to the search map, and I'm going to do Allen County, Indiana. All right, and you get a little bit of a blurb about how to use it and what you can and can't do. And so I'm going to do a coverage map because I think Allen County is a great county to kind of show where we have greater numbers of film and where you can see where we usually have less film. So we do focus on rural America. Pilots had a hard time kind of getting through streets to get like closer suburban areas. If there is an airport, let's say right next to your house, you're less likely to get some film because of airport regulations, things like that. So in Allen County, we can see that all around here, we have lots of film. We got some darker blues, which means there's usually about 40 photos or more. And then you can see kind of where Fort Wayne proper and suburbs are, there's a little less film. So that's always a good thing to keep in mind when searching for an area. I use this map in a way that is, I don't know the mailing address. I can't remember any rural routes, but I know when I left the gas station on the corner of this road to get to my grandma's house, I took a right, I took a left, I took another right, and I was at her door. So that's a good way where you can zoom in. I'll turn this off, makes it a little bit easier. So I see Milan or Milan Center. And we will, let's say you go up and you know you need to take a right onto Darling Road and keep following it down, keep following it down. And I know that my grandma's house was right about in this area. So I can search nearby film. And there I have all the film from 1 mile radius from that point I've chosen. And this is a great way to kind of, if you don't have the address anymore, even if that building has long been torn down or something has happened to it, you can still find photos of that house without ever needing a mailing address. So I'm going to keep scrolling and you can see that 81% of our collection is searchable in this county, which means that we can browse the entire county. And we do have some film from 1966 and 1969 that is unmapped, and we do not know where its location is. So we always send this to people to make sure that they can go through this, because maybe you guys might know where this building is and you can go and pin it, and then that means somebody else will be able to find it later in the future. So that is the majority of the searching, our search results, how to get to different sections of our search results. And remember, if you ever need help or have any questions, you can always email us at service@vintageaerial.com and you will probably get a response from me. And now we're going back to Lance.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can help and why we need help in the first place. One of the things, though, before I jump into that, I think I forgot to mention is a lot of people are probably wondering, like, how far back do our photos go? And the answer to that question is it really depends. Our earliest photos are from 1963, and they end sometime in the mid-2000s. And it varies completely in every way. It varies on the county, it varies by state. And so each state and county will have a different start of photos and a different end. So I just wanted to insert that because I forgot to mention it earlier. All right, so here's the problem. Our photos have approximate addresses in most cases, which means that we have the county map, we have the flight paths, and when you perform a search on our website, we will generate search results for you just by you typing in a modern address. And that's great. In some cases, like Alexis mentioned earlier, we have a lot of film with no reference. We're pretty sure we know what county that film is in, and we're pretty sure that we have the year, but we can't generate search results by typing in an address, unless, of course, someone has pinned a photo location, or maybe they left a comment with a keyword in it, or something to help our system generate search results. but it's problematic because as time passes, these photos become more and more unrecognizable without having any data attached to them. And many of our photos probably couldn't be recognized by anyone. And so the only way that we can preserve these photos so that they have some kind of value to anyone is to try to identify them. And the only way that we can think to do that is with crowdsourcing. And so we're really kind of hoping to help incentivize people to help identify these photos with comments or with geographic location or anything that might be helpful. And the way we're doing that is through our free accounts. And I just want to talk a little bit about accounts and what they do. As I mentioned, they are free. We're not charging anything to participate in this. An account gives you the ability to save photos. It helps you kind of track your progress of what you've liked. And it also gives you access to a really simple magnification tool where you can click on a photo and zoom in a little bit. And anytime you leave a comment or help identify a photo by giving it a geographic location, you'll earn points, and the points have value. The points can be used towards the purchase of our products. If hopefully you have a photo in our collection that is meaningful to you and would be something you'd like to have printed out or purchased in some way, we reward that participation with issuing points. And just for a bit of context, comments are worth 5 points, and tagging a photo's location is worth 4 points, and points are worth about 5 cents. So if you identified 5 rolls of film, you could purchase an 8x12, and 5 rolls of film has about 36 images each. And if you were particularly familiar with a certain area, that could go by pretty quickly. And it's really meaningful for us. And I think anyone who might have a connection to one of these photos, because all of these contributions and the reason we're trying to incentivize, helping to identify them is because people want to see these. They might not know that this photo exists. But the trouble is they have to visually recognize it. We give you search results of rolls of film, of which there are 36 images each. But from that point, that photo needs to be visually recognized. And I just want to reiterate that that's becoming more and more difficult for all sorts of reasons, that the many farms and homesteads are no longer here. They're gone completely. And so in order to visually recognize something like that, you would have had to been there or someone would have had to been there to see it. And not to mention, it's going to be a little more confusing seeing it from the sky. So all that to say, we need help. I feel like the general public and anyone with a connection to rural America is going to need your help if you can offer it, to help identify these pictures. One of the things I touched on a little earlier is, and I'm pivoting here to talking about collections in general. Our entire 22 million photos is made up of a few collections, one of which is pretty substantial, contains about 16 million images. We are always searching for opportunities to connect with content owners who are willing to work with us and who understand what we're doing and how these photographs need preserved. And while we recognize that not every company that started taking these photographs took a collection that had 16 million images, we want to speak to anyone. in whatever capacity they were involved or might know of content out there. And it's just something that is a part of what we're trying to do. It's not just, we're not going to stop once our existing collections are completely developed. We're going to continue looking for more. So please reach out to us if you know of anything. Our contact information will be made available, and we'd certainly love to talk. But from this point, I think I'm going to pass it over to Fritz, and he's going to wrap things up for us.
Thanks to Lance and Alexis and Nathan for taking all of us through the different operations within Vintage Aerial, what we have, why we do what we do, what motivates us, and how we can interact with you. I want to share with you, I've been part of this company since its inception in 2009, and I'm not kidding when I say when I was watching Alexis do her search and watch her enter the data and see all the images come up on the screen, I still felt that sense of thrill that is why I became involved in this company at the start. It's just, I don't want to sound overly proud of our company, but we're all very proud of what we do. And to see this happen and the application of new technology to these historical assets in a way that brings them real onto the screen and into your lives and our lives, it still gives me really quite a tingle. It's just a thrill to me. The great American historian C. Vann Woodward, who was one of my mentors, wrote very movingly in one of his books about the moment that caused him to become interested in history, which was the sense that you have that history happened to you in your part of the world. And history isn't just necessarily the kings and the presidents and all the entrepreneurs and inventors, but history is something that happens to each of us and has happened to each of our families over all the generations. And to be able to share this with you today is a really wonderful experience for all of us. We feel that what we're doing is bringing history into the present and bringing it to you in a way that makes it real and useful and evocative. That's really why the group of us have come together. I was reflecting that those of us who are assembled today span age ranges from 20s to late 60s, but it's all a very vibrant activity for us. As Lance alluded to, in the late 1940s, there were about 6 million rural American homesteads, and now there are fewer than 2 million. And although the homesteads have disappeared, our photographs make it possible to make those homesteads real and to share with them. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Kansas. It doesn't exist anymore. The land is still there, but it's been acquired. But the history of the ranch is something we can share in our family, and the photographs of that ranch allow me to tell my daughters about it and to share the excitement of it with everybody. So it's something that I've lived, and it's something that I feel, even as I say today, as I hear Nathan and Lance and Alexis talk about it, it's just a thrill to have the chance. Outreach of this kind is something that we're very much committed to. We're always looking for organizations to partner with. We have an active partnership with Ancestry. We're looking to have active partnerships with historical societies really around the country. So this has been a wonderful opportunity to share our excitement over what we have, share this with you. Thank you for your time. And I guess now I would just ask Allison if it's time for us to begin the question and answer. We'd love to have the chance to visit with everybody online now and answer questions, hear your suggestions, and get your perspective. So thanks very much for the time.
Thank you. That was wonderful. There have been lots of chats going on in the chat, and people are saying wonderful things. A few of you had asked really good questions, and I knew they would get lost, and they are, unfortunately. So if you wouldn't mind, put them in the Q&A. They were fabulous. So please, please, please put those in the Q&A. But we're going to go ahead and get started with some of the questions. If Vintage Aerial, if you guys want to turn on your camera and unmute, we would love to. Hey,
I'm Lance.
see, we're going to get faces with names and it's going to be great, guys. All
Okay.
right, so we're just going to start at the beginning and go from there. And if
Further back. We're trying to get us all in here so
Sorry.
that we can just answer the questions as a group here.
no worries, however it works. A couple things, just so everybody knows that if you want a copy of the chat, email us, we will send that to you. Yes, it's disabled to record yourselves. That is something that we do here. So yes, I will answer that question. But let's go ahead and get started. Did the US government hire these pilots too for some of their agricultural work? The first aerial I saw was on a US soil conservation report done for their father around 1956. I think I also saw the farm in more recent years on aerial photos of Connecticut, since my parents' farm was quite close to Connecticut. Would you have these aerial photos too? And then they also mentioned they think UMass might have some early Massachusetts ones.
Okay.
There's a couple questions in there.
Yeah, so I'll start from the beginning. All of our photographs were privately taken. They don't mix with any sort of government photography that exists, and so therefore no connection to government photography whatsoever. We are working on implementing some of the government aerial photography to help people, to help them see our photos a little easier, and we're working on a system for that right now.
It basically gives another layer when you're looking at the satellite view we're working on, so that all of that USGS government data that is open to the public, you can click on it and the 1960s layer will show up, which will look more like the photos you're trying to find.
Yeah, but there's no overlap in terms of our content and government content at this time. So.
Awesome. And then they were asking about more recent aerial photos. Do you guys have more recent ones in your collection?
I think the most recent we have is 2007,
Yes.
but generally it's about 2003, 2004. And as Lance had spoken about earlier, the company that took them originally did that painting process. So oddly, you might be looking through our photos and be like, why are these 2000 photos in black and white? And the reason is because they continued to use this painting process as an upsell. So we have black and white photos all the way up till about 1999, 1998. And then we have some digitally taken color photos after that. But we certainly do not take new photos. There's a huge drone industry happening right now where there's a huge amount of people doing aerial photos. And so we don't try to compete in that market because it's a very complicated process, and we have this, it's enough work to try to get the photos that we have working. So.
And I guess I would just add that one of our longer term thoughts when we think of our company as a resource that's central to the development of an alternative history of rural America, as I alluded to earlier, we've thought and we continue to think actively about joint ventures with these companies, the drone companies that are taking current photographs. And we've talked about technologies that would allow us to sort of by computer activity align the same level, the same angle of the oblique photograph. So you could really do side-by-side comparisons. We're not interested in doing that as a competitive enterprise, but we think it's a natural joint venture. And it's certainly one of the things that in our last strategic planning session, we talked about as one of the next iterations of what we want to do.
Awesome. Thank you. Someone's asking about the coverage. So they're specifically looking at Massachusetts, but I know you showed that map, but is there a way for people to figure out how much of a specific state's covered?
If you go to the photos page, before you choose your state and county, there is an interactive map there that can be zoomed way in on. So if you're just trying to get an overall idea of how much photos we have, you can use that map. Or if you do select the county, that county page says how many photos we have. how many has been mapped and all that stuff. So there's a whole bunch of information on that top level county page. And there's also like the most viewed photos and the most recent comments and all sorts of information about a specific county on those pages.
Awesome, thank you. Can you do a search for a town that came into existence in 1954 from farmland?
That depends on whether another flight path was created out in the next few years or not. So flight paths or pilots would go out depending on how often the company wanted them to go out. So maybe if there was a boom and they thought, well, we can get more door-to-door sales, let's do another path in that area. There may be film of that area, but it's very much a county dependent type of process.
And the location is not necessarily, so if the town was created in 1950, but it isn't there anymore, our system uses the current address to generate a GPS location. So if you're doing a search and the address is something that doesn't exist anymore, that's what that map search that Alexis showed us is for. Because that way, maybe that town doesn't exist anymore, but you can still search that spot and it will pull up the film from that era in that area.
Thank you. Okay, so how do you get an address if all you have is a rural route number?
Well, it's very difficult. A big reason they stopped doing rural route numbers is because of their vagueness, basically. But there really is there's some sites that try to transfer it to a normal address, and sometimes you can get that. But generally, the best way to do it is if you have like a plat map that has the old rural route numbers, and you can find the section number. All of the maps that we've scanned are on that index page that Alexis showed you guys. And if you know your section number and your township, you can see that on those maps. And then you can, go to the township, go to the section number, and you'll see that line, and you can say, oh, it's roll 42. I would say if that's the only information you have, probably use the map tool, and because you don't have to be pinpoint, as long as you get close, that within a mile of that spot, all that film will come up for the search.
And then I would just also add, if you find yourself in that situation, reach out to us, and
For sure.
we're happy to help translate some of that minutia. So.
Or even if there is a church that was just down the road from there, that can help, because usually the church, if it's still around, will have a modern mail address that you can kind of start your search from. So churches, gas stations usually tend to stay in the same areas pretty often. So our schools, cemeteries, we can also start searches from those locations and kind of work our way out to help you get to the property that you're trying to get to.
We also didn't mention it, but you can also search by keywords. So if it's a address near a town, you can type in the name of the town, and people that have commented on these photos, there may be a bunch of photos that come up that say, this is in the old town of this, or this is on rural route 16, even though it's not part of the search. So keywords can also be very helpful in finding a photo.
Thank you. So while you guys were talking, I went ahead and put your website in the chat, the contact page in the chat. Somebody was asking about one of the email addresses that was specifically mentioned. I'm guessing if you go to the contact page, you'll get you guys.
Yeah, anything that says email us will come right to the address you mentioned. Yeah. Okay.
So that, guys, go to the contact page, go to their website. That's the best information I can give you. Okay, so you had mentioned so like the oldest pictures, like for certain collections, just randomly, what is the oldest picture you have?
It's from spring of 1963. There's a whole section of film from 1963, and that's as far back as we go. We don't have specific dates. We only know the year, and sort of from looking at the picture, we can tell the season it was taken. But we probably have 35 boxes of 1963 film. So Not every county is going to have 1963, certainly. It's mainly, a lot of it is from the nearby areas where state aerial existed. So Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, probably Kentucky. We have some older stuff there. But it really varies from county to county. You know, if we have it, it should come up in the search. We do have maps for most of that older film. So it does vary, but the oldest picture anywhere would be 1963.
And if I
Yeah.
might just add to that, Lance mentioned that part of our current activity is always searching for other archives. We know that, as I said, this business became really vibrant and feasible in the late 1950s. It flourished in the 1960s with State Aerial, which is this large collection we have. But we know that there were a number of smaller companies that were much more local and regionally based. We have some information about them. A lot of those photo collections no longer exist, but we know that a number of them do. So among the many things that we are looking for help with and are trying to crowdsource is just identifying collections, no matter what size they are. If they are of rural America, we're very interested in them. That is one of our activities, to search for and try to enter into arrangements, whether they're licensing arrangements or acquisition arrangements, to gain access to these collections so that we can display them on our website the way we're displaying our other collections. So for anyone who's listening now or who knows of these collections, we would love to get that information from you, because we do know there's an entire cache of these photographs
And
for at least 6 to 8 years before our earliest date that are out there. So we're actively interested in finding them.
And then the clock is sort of ticking on that, because there is a shelf life for 35mm film, and it's about 50 to 70 years. So a lot of those collections are approaching that point. And if they get to the point where they've gone past their shelf life and they've lost their emulsion, they can no longer be scanned, and they basically have become ephemera and gone. So
Right.
Thank you. Just as a side comment to our attendees, there are some really nice suggestions in the chat. Make sure you're reading the chat. And then multiple people have asked, what address do you search? Do you search the current address, the historical address? What address?
The current mailing address. So as current as you can get. The post mail address is probably the best bet, and that is what feeds into our search bar. So when you're typing that address, as it pops up, you'll have to click on the one that is closest to yours or that you know is yours. And that is the mailing, the US Postal modern day mailing address.
Right.
So that is your best bet for finding your property.
So even if the property is not there anymore and you use the address of the house next to it,
Mhm.
it's going to pull up the film because it's using the current address to create a GPS location. So that doesn't necessarily, it could be a Walmart now, but if you search for the address of that Walmart, it's going to pull up the film for that area.
Okay. And same with street name changes, address changes, you go with the current address.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you. Wanted to make sure we were crystal clear on that one. So someone made the comment for Western areas, Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, etc. There were no photos taken, or do you just not have them in the collection?
So for multiple reasons, everything pretty much, other than a little bit, like I said, we've got about 3 million left out of the 22 million left to scan. So most stuff is up. For the Western states, there was a few problems. The planes are in Ohio. It's much further to fly out there or to find people in Colorado to do the shooting. Houses are much more spread out, and also the driving of the whole thing was to sell photos door to door. And the door-to-door salesmen were very picky, and they didn't want to go to Colorado and drive a half an hour in between every potential sale. So they skipped a lot of the Western states just because of the geography of having to travel and find, and a lot of the houses would be like covered by mountains, or the angles are weird. So there was a whole bunch of difficulties with shooting in those areas. And that's why we don't have those. I know we were in Salt Lake City for Roots Tech, and we had to tell everyone that came up to the booth that we don't have any photos in this state.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that collections may exist, but they're not currently in our wheelhouse or in our arsenal of photos, so to speak. And we definitely like to find them for
Yeah,
sure.
definitely.
I mean, all the photos that we do have we're sort of at the mercy of this sales organization that was responsible for taking all the photos. So where they were taken, the content, the angles, the type of film that was used, it was never intended in anyone's wildest dreams to be saved for this long and to be scanned and preserved, but here we are. So in a lot of ways,
It'd have been very nice if they had.
use better film, use better cameras. We have a whole list of things that we would have liked, but I say that to say we're grateful for what we have, but a lot of things are just out of our control too. So
This was, as Nathan's point suggested, these were private businesses and they were driven by certain economic factors. And in each respect, where the planes were, how far apart the houses are, so how long the planes had to fly, then how far apart they are in terms of tracking down the potential buyers, the door-to-door salesman. In each of those respects, the economic reality made it a very different prospect in the Western states. And so for that reason, the private enterprises tend to be more located where the houses are closer together. Now, as the comments suggested earlier, there may be governmental resources that help fill in that picture. But we haven't focused on that yet in terms of bringing those pictures into our collection. That's certainly part of what we're interested in.
Awesome. Thank you. We are at time. I'm going to do one more question. And then if we did not get to your question, folks, I am so sorry. Please, please, please shoot us an email or go to the contact page. It's in the chat. I'll post it again here shortly. But we want to answer your questions. So please feel free to reach out if we didn't have time to get to your question today. But the last one, are there photographs of rural churches, cemeteries, along with the farms and homesteads?
There are definitely churches, cemeteries. When we are going through and mapping unmapped film, because we do that on during our downtime here at the office, or when we're posting new film that has been recently uploaded, we will go through and I will purposely try to find the churches first, because they don't change very often and they stay in the same spot. So churches are a big part of like finding exactly where a film location is in that role. So if you have a church that you would like to find, I would definitely search for its address or even try doing the keyword search for that church.
Yeah.
Search and church, a lot of cemeteries of it. You will probably be able to find it because they knew back then too, people had a very deep connection with church.
Yeah.
And would want either to buy the church for their service and their people and post it up in the church. So yes, after saying church so many times, yes, there are churches in the film.
There's all kinds of little weird things too. As you're searching through, you'll find an old sandwich shop you used to go to, or the gas station that you used to fill your truck up at. Like there's a lot of little gems that you go through and find, even just, weird stuff in people's backyards and things. So
That's fantastic. That's so exciting. People have been very appreciative in the chat. There have been great suggestions, great conversations happening. I know you guys couldn't see those happening in real life, but it's an amazing resource. And I'm so glad you guys were here to chat with us today. And all of our attendees, thank you for joining us. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to us or Vintage Aerial. They've very generously offered to answer your questions. So go to their contact page. It's in the chat. So thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a wonderul day.
thank you guys.
Thank you,
It's a
Allison.
pleasure
Bye.
to be here, and we're happy to help with anything that you need.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.